Hello, Jeremy here again. So my goal with this database was to utilize the database and find something related to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So in searching of the database, I determined that I wanted to focus on the university aspect or non-acceptance of the Civil Rights Act within the universities. So the database itself provided a variety of sources. The total results returned over 23,000 for the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and then I also combined searches to include terms like Johnson and civil rights, and of course this increased the numbers of results collectively. Overall, the ease of the database was simple and straightforward. I thought it was pretty simple to use. The results were often pretty specific to the topic, which was kind of unique and kind of good, but given the abundance, that's also going to mean a lot of review. But one thing I did notice that was often the results sometimes use parts of the keyword too rather than a full phrase. So it did highlight it enough so it was at least easy to identify it for me, but it was broken up and using words even like the and act and things of that nature. So it was kind of limiting in that sense. So really my assumption would be more that if I took the time to learn the certain search patterns or how to list it or how to reference it or quotations or ands or ors or whatever, and this would probably define it a little bit more and make it more focused. But just using the generic approach that I did, I was still able to find plenty of sources. The articles that I found, the first one was the schools in the South comply on rights. 199 colleges pledged they will uphold Act of 1964, and this was written by the New York Times. And the second article I found was the University Brief, and it was the 64 Act doesn't apply to Bake, which was a student, but the university says rights. The Act does not apply to Bake was written by Washington Post. So the last article also was a reference to about 6 area South schools that lost school aid, and one of them was a college. And the article was also talking about disciplining and different stuff associated with the 1964 Acts written by the Times. But there was 8 other articles that I found just in that quick reference and quick research. They were all solid, and they were very supportive of the argument in a sense. And this whole collective, in an approach to a society or an organization, I feel like I could build something that would be pretty solid to talk about what the Rights Act is and also develop the idea of what the college university response was to that. So really, my goal at the end of the day was to use the other articles that I found to kind of support or beef up the argument against the civil rights, or not against, but to support the civil rights rather, and even President Johnson's efforts at the time. But once the background was established, the articles that I spoke about above, the idea that some universities followed suit and others didn't, and for the 64 Act to be implemented at their university, it was something that was a decision that they had to make, I guess. And notably, one of the universities that came up was the University of Mississippi. This was one of the colleges that actually complied, which is a big deal if you're familiar with any civil rights history. But the Bake article was a unique perspective as well, as it was regarding a university student, as I mentioned, who was white, and he was suing because he was denied entry to UC Davis Medical School because he was white. And really it had to do with it. His argument was the Title VI of the Act was violated because the university had implemented a special admissions program for racial minorities. So his argument was against their violation thereof. The last article addressed some public schools in the South, but one university, as I mentioned before, Anderson College, was the first college to actually be involved in a termination case related to federal funding. So the purpose of this research for me is really to show that the Civil Rights Act of 64, although implemented as a federal law, the public and private institutions did not always comply, and lawsuits were filed against universities for discrimination by white students. Some universities were terminated by federal government for receiving federal funds. And as most of you know, that means no student loans, grants, other general funding, etc. But I did find that overall the database was effective. It was good at providing news that was specifically related to the topics of choice. And by using a database and developing more specific phrases, as I mentioned, for searching and even utilizing the tutorial that I saw pop up, it's possible that it would find a lot more detailed or specific resources in my search. The topic also was the based on the 60s and 70s time frame. But I did notice that from other searches, when I was just kind of testing the database, some other keyword searches, that there were a lot of articles that were listed from the early 1800s and into modern, so to speak. So my assumption is that there's pretty good depth of time and reference to whatever it may be that we're researching. But again, like typical, to me, this database is something that was very valuable to work in conjunction with the others that we have in this course in the efforts to do my research. So thank you.